One moment, he was reaching for a bottle of water, thinking only of the long drive ahead. The next, he found himself face down on the sidewalk, handcuffed, and surrounded by flashing lights for the supposed crime of wearing his military uniform. What those officers failed to understand was that the man they had just arrested wasn't some impersonator looking for attention. He was the very embodiment of service, dignity, and sacrifice. This is the story of how one soldier refused to bow his head and how the truth answered with force, honor, and consequence. The late afternoon sun had begun its slow descent behind the downtown skyline as Staff Sergeant Jonathan Miles stepped into the corner gas station on Brookfield and Elm. He had just finished a 14-hour shift at Camp Weston, a nearby Army Reserve facility, and decided to grab a cold drink before heading home. Still dressed in his freshly laundered military uniform, the insignias on his chest gleamed beneath the convenience store's flickering fluorescent lights. His boots, though scuffed from the day's duties, moved with confidence and quiet pride. He nodded politely at the cashier as he made his way to the back refrigerator, selected a bottle of spring water, and headed toward the checkout. That's what happened. The sound of sirens shattered the stillness outside. Tires screeched violently against the asphalt. Within seconds, 2 police cruisers came to a halt just beyond the front doors. Red and blue lights pulsed against the glass. Conversations ceased. People froze mid-gesture. 2 officers burst through the doors. One was tall, angular, and sharp-jawed, Officer Thomas Granger. The other, shorter with a broader build and thinning hairline, was Officer Daniel Polk. Their hands hovered ominously above their holsters, and their eyes swept the room until they landed on Jonathan. "Step away from the counter," Officer Granger barked, his voice hard-edged and unwavering. "Hands in the air. Now." Startled, Jonathan looked up from his wallet. "I'm sorry," he asked, his voice calm but firm. "You heard me," Granger growled. "Put your hands up. Step away from the register." Confused but compliant, Jonathan slowly raised his... The bottle of water slipped from his grasp and rolled across the tile floor, stopping at the base of an empty chip rack. Customers glanced around, unsure of what they were witnessing. One woman took a step back and grabbed her child's arm protectively. A man who had been filling out lottery tickets discreetly pulled out his phone and began recording. Officer Polk moved swiftly behind Jonathan, grabbing his right arm and twisting it forcefully behind his back. Before Jonathan could offer further explanation, he felt the cold snap of a handcuff around his wrist. "You're under suspicion of impersonating military personnel," Polk stated, securing the other cuff. Jonathan blinked. "Impersonating? I serve in the U.S. Army Reserve. I just finished duty at Camp Weston." Granger chuckled. "Yeah, and I'm his Secretary of Defense. Save it. We've seen this trick before." Jonathan didn't resist. He knew that escalating the situation would only feed their assumptions. Instead, he allowed them to lead him outside, where the late summer heat scorched the pavement. They forced him to kneel. The texture of the sidewalk pressed through his pants and against his knees as passing cars slowed, some drivers gawking, others lifting their phones. He kept his gaze steady. His breathing remained even. Because Jonathan knew one thing above all else: the truth would stand, even if he had to stand alone first. "I'd like to make one phone call," he said quietly. Polk scoffed. "To who? A lawyer?" Jonathan met his eyes. "No, my commanding officer." There was a brief pause. The 2 officers exchanged a glance and shrugged. "Go ahead," Granger said dismissively. Still cuffed, Jonathan awkwardly reached into his left pocket and retrieved his phone. With practiced ease, he tapped a familiar name, Colonel Harold Jennings. The phone rang twice before the colonel answered. "Colonel Jennings speaking." "Sir, this is Staff Sergeant Miles. I've been detained outside a gas station on Brookfield and Elm. Officers are accusing me of impersonating military personnel. I was in uniform when they cuffed me." A beat of silence followed. Then, "Stay exactly where you are, Sergeant. Do not speak further. I'm en route." The call ended. Jonathan returned the phone to his pocket, looked up at the officers, and said, "Help is on the way." They laughed. But that laughter wouldn't last long. Exactly 7 minutes later, the quiet hum of the street was broken by the arrival of 3 unmarked black SUVs. They didn't come with sirens, nor did they need to. The presence alone of the government-plated vehicles was enough to part the growing crowd like the Red Sea. From the front vehicle, 4 individuals stepped out. They moved with precision, their movements synchronized and deliberate. Each wore a suit adorned with military pins and lanyards. One man in particular stepped forward, a tall, silver-haired officer in full uniform, his chest adorned with rows of medals and commendations. Colonel Harold Jennings. The onlookers murmured. A few recognized the name from local news stories or Veterans Day ceremonies. He carried himself like a man used to commanding silence and receiving it. He walked directly up to the 2 officers. "Which one of you is Officer Granger?" Jennings asked coolly. Granger hesitated, then raised his hand. "That would be me, sir." Jennings's voice remained level. "Officer Granger, the man you placed in handcuffs is Staff Sergeant Jonathan Miles. He has served this nation honorably for over a decade and is currently assigned to my command." Granger opened his mouth, but Jennings didn't let him speak. "You arrested him in full uniform without verifying his identification, credentials, or even his name. Is that correct?" Polk interjected. "We thought he was a fake. You see a lot of people wearing." Jennings turned sharply to face him. "Did you ask to see his CAT card? His base access badge? Any form of verification?" Neither officer responded. Jennings stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. "You racially profiled one of our soldiers. And now both of you are being placed under federal investigation for misconduct and civil rights violations." A woman in a black suit stepped forward and handed both officers a sealed envelope. "You are relieved of duty effective immediately," she said. "Surrender your weapons, badges, and radios. This is not negotiable." The crowd began to cheer. Murmurs of "about time" and "serves them right" floated through the air. Granger's jaw clenched. "This is a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Jennings interrupted, "was thinking you could treat a uniformed black soldier like a criminal without consequence." He turned his attention to Jonathan, who was still on his knees. "Get up, Sergeant." Jennings reached down and helped him to his feet, brushing dust from his sleeves. "This never should have happened. And I swear to you, it will never happen again." Applause broke out. A woman holding a bag of groceries began to clap. Others joined. One man lifted his phone to record the moment. Children watching from behind the glass of the store waved excitedly. Officers Granger and Polk were escorted to separate vehicles, not in cuffs, but with their heads lowered, their futures unraveling one disciplinary report at a time. Jonathan stood tall, his uniform now stained with the residue of hot pavement, but his dignity intact. He offered a respectful salute to Colonel Jennings, who returned it with crisp precision. By the following morning, the footage had gone viral. Clips of the incident flooded news feeds, television broadcasts, and every major social platform. The hashtags "Honor Over Hate" and "Salute Sergeant Miles" dominated national conversation. Prominent journalists praised Jonathan's composure. Civil rights leaders called the incident a modern-day disgrace met with old-school discipline. That evening, the mayor of the city, Madeleine Guerra, held a press conference on the steps of City Hall. "I would like to issue a formal apology to Staff Sergeant Jonathan Miles," she began. "What occurred yesterday is not representative of our values as a city. The officers involved have been terminated from the department. Not suspended, not reassigned. Fired." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. "Sergeant Miles has shown the kind of restraint, professionalism, and courage that every citizen deserves from those in uniform police and military alike. He is owed our gratitude, not our suspicion." The crowd gathered outside erupted into cheers. Inside his modest apartment, Jonathan watched the press conference while eating a bowl of cereal. His phone buzzed constantly with messages of support, some from fellow soldiers, others from strangers around the country. For the first time since the incident, he allowed himself a small smile. 2 weeks later, he received an invitation to speak at the city's police academy. He accepted, arriving in full uniform to a room full of young cadets who shifted nervously in their chairs. He didn't bring notes. He didn't need them. Before you put on that badge, he began, you better understand something. Power doesn't make you right. It just makes your mistakes louder. The next time you see someone who looks like Mead and assume, ask, listen, respect isn't a favor. It's a right. And justice? Justice is what happens when respect is denied. There was silence. Then, slowly applause. Later that evening, Jonathan sat on his front porch, sipping sweet tea and watching the horizon burn orange with the setting sun. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel bitter. He felt seen. He hadn't needed vengeance. What he had earned was something far greater. Respect. Dignity. A reminder that honor doesn't demand a spotlight, simply demands to be defended. And defend it, he had, in the calmest, most dignified way possible. Staff Sergeant Jonathan Miles didn't just prove his identity that day. He reminded a city and a country off what real valor looks like.